begins in New York City, 1965. A restless baby boy cries under the roof of a family that already knows the taste of Hollywood, yet also the sting of chaos. His father, Robert Downey Jr., a filmmaker known for his underground style, and his mother, Elsie, an actress with a warm heart, were artists living on the edge of the industry. That baby Robert Downey Jr. was born into creativity, but also turbulence. From the earliest years, his childhood was anything but ordinary. He wasn't raised in a typical home where rules and structure shaped a boy. Instead, Robert's playground was film sets, crowded rooms filled with smoke, eccentric personalities, and endless improvisations. At the age of 5, he appeared in his father's film band, a child actor. Yes, but a child robbed of simplicity. The lines between fantasy and reality blurred for him before he even knew what childhood meant. There were tender moments with his mother, who believed in him with all her soul, encouraging his spark of talent. But there was also pain. His father, though loving, introduced him to substances far too early. Imagine being a little boy handed the weight of adult vices, not understanding the long road of demons that would follow. Robert would later admit in interviews, when you grow up with drugs, it's hard to have a clear sense of what normal is. Despite the chaos, Robert had one burning light inside: performance. He could mimic accents, charm a crowd, make people laugh, make them feel. By his teenage years, he knew acting wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. His way to channel everything messy inside him. But the boy's life was fractured. His parents divorced when he was 13, and that break cut deep. His mother's tenderness couldn't erase the emptiness of a split home, and his father's influence still shadowed him. He moved to California with his dad, but later dropped out of high school, chasing acting full-time. Some called it reckless, others saw it as passion. For Robert, it was a leap into the unknown. He was young, raw, and unprepared for how brutal Hollywood could be. Still, that boy with piercing eyes carried both tragedy and brilliance in equal measure. He was about to step onto a stage that would either destroy him or one day crown him as one of the greatest redemption stories ever told. A hungry dreamer in Hollywood. The bright lights of Hollywood are intoxicating, but for a young Robert Downey Jr., they were more like a mirage in the desert, shiny from a distance, yet brutal up close. After dropping out of high school, he packed his ambition and a restless heart, chasing the same dream that had consumed so many before him. Los Angeles wasn't waiting with open arms. It was a battlefield, and Robert had to fight for every audition, every line, every glance of recognition. He worked odd jobs to survive: busboy, shoe store clerk, even table dancing at one point, just to pay rent while hunting for acting opportunities. The struggle was raw, but his charisma was undeniable. Casting directors saw in him a spark, a kind of unpredictable energy that felt alive on camera. He was soon invited into the legendary Saturday Night Live cast in 1985. It was supposed to be his big break, but fate had other plans. That season was a disaster. Ratings dropped, critics trashed the cast, and Robert, along with others, was fired after just 1 year. Imagine the sting of that moment, a dream crushed before it could even bloom. For a while, Robert was just another struggling actor in a city that forgets faces overnight. But then came the films. Small roles at first, weird science, the pickup artist, and soon people started noticing the boy who could shapeshift into any character. He had a natural rhythm, a way of making even small roles magnetic. Yet the breakthrough was still elusive. Hollywood is ruthless. It teases with one hand and slams the door with the other. Robert wrestled with rejection after rejection, and the insecurities of his childhood lingered like shadows. At night, loneliness often pushed him toward the same demons his father had once handed him. Drugs and alcohol became his silent companions, dulling the pain of a career that moved one step forward and two steps back. But the fire inside him never went out. In the late 1980s, Robert landed more substantial roles, showcasing a depth beyond his years. He was charming yet vulnerable, reckless yet brilliant. The industry was beginning to whisper his name, and those whispers soon grew louder. He was not just another actor, he was different. The stage was being set. Hollywood was about to test him with a role that would define him, a role that would demand every ounce of his soul and push him toward both glory and destruction. Becoming Chaplin, becoming a legend. The early 1990s, Hollywood was buzzing, and Robert Downey Jr. was about to step into the shoes of one of cinema's greatest icons. When he was cast to play Charlie Chaplin in Richard Attenborough's 1990 film, Chaplin, many doubted him. Could this unpredictable young actor truly embody the silent era genius? The man who made the world laugh and cry without uttering a single word. Robert threw himself into the role like a man possessed. He studied Chaplin's walk, his posture, even his quirks down to the tilt of his head. He learned how to play the violin left-handed, trained in Chaplin's physical comedy, and obsessed over every nuance. On set, it wasn't Robert people saw, it was Charlie, reborn. The performance was mesmerizing. When the film hit theaters, critics raved, and Robert earned his first Academy Award nomination. Overnight, he was no longer just a rising star. He was hailed as one of the finest actors of his generation. But behind the applause, a storm was brewing. Fame had its cost, and Robert's old demons followed him into the spotlight. The pressure of success, the emptiness left by a broken childhood, the addiction that gnawed at him, it all came crashing in. The world saw Chaplin's brilliance on the screen, but behind closed doors, Robert was unraveling. He was now living in the fast lane of Hollywood, the parties, the endless temptations, the dangerous illusion that he could handle it all. In moments of clarity, he'd tell himself, "You've made it, don't blow it." But the whispers of his past were louder. Substance abuse tightened its grip, pulling him into a cycle he couldn't escape. Yet, even in chaos, his talent never dimmed. He delivered unforgettable performances in films like Heart and Souls, Only You, and Natural Born Killers. Directors loved working with him because he brought electricity to every scene, an unpredictable brilliance that felt alive. But the industry also began to see the risk Robert was both a gift and a gamble. The irony was cruel. At the very moment when Robert should have been climbing to the top of Hollywood, his personal life was dragging him down. The man who had embodied Chaplin's genius now stood at a dangerous crossroads, where brilliance and self-destruction collided. The world admired his artistry, but no one could imagine how dark the next chapter of his life was about to become. The fall into shadows, the applause faded, the cameras dimmed, and the brilliant actor who once became Charlie Chaplin was now sinking into a nightmare of his own making. The mid-to late 1990s became the darkest chapter of Robert Downey Jr.'s life, where addiction didn't just whisper, it screamed, taking control of everything he had built. In 1996, the headlines began. Robert was arrested, caught with heroin, cocaine, and an unloaded gun while driving down Sunset Boulevard. It was a shocking image. The once celebrated star reduced to a cautionary tale on the evening news. When brought before the judge, Robert, with raw honesty, admitted, "It's like I have a loaded gun in my mouth, and I like the taste of metal." That confession wasn't a performance. It was a cry for help. But Hollywood is unforgiving. Studio doors closed, scripts disappeared, and his once bright career became a shadow. More arrests followed, breaking parole, missing drug tests, rehab stints that never stuck. The tabloids feasted on his downfall, labeling him unreliable, a lost cause. For the audience, Robert Downey Jr. was no longer a rising star. He was a tragedy in slow motion. Prison became a part of his story. Imagine it, an actor who once stood on the Oscar stage now wearing orange. Behind bars, stripped of freedom, stripped of dignity, nights in solitary, days of reflection, yet even those harsh walls couldn't fully break the cycle. He would get clean, relapse, get clean again, fall harder. It was endless, but beneath the chaos, there was still a fighter somewhere deep inside. The little boy who once mimicked accents and dreamed of applause was refusing to die. Even in the darkest hours, people who knew him whispered of his genius, his charm, his ability to light up a room. Directors like James Chewbacca and allies in the industry kept trying to pull him back, believing the spark wasn't gone, it was just buried. Still, to the world, Robert was a fallen angel. The actor who had everything was now nothing more than a headline, a warning. Fans who once adored him had moved on. Hollywood had turned its back, and Robert stood on the edge of total collapse, staring into an abyss that threatened to swallow him forever. But rock bottom has a strange way of becoming a turning point. The man who had lost it all was about to discover that the greatest comeback stories are written in the ashes of failure, a spark of redemption. By the early 2000s, Robert Downey Jr. was living in exile from the very world that once celebrated him. Too many. He was finished, a lost talent buried beneath mugshots and courtroom drama. Yet fate has a way of testing the strongest souls in the harshest ways. And for Robert, salvation didn't arrive like a spotlight. It crept in quietly through the people who still saw hope in him when almost no one else did. One of those lifelines was his mother, Elsie. She never stopped believing her son could rise again. Her gentle words, her faith, became a reminder of the boy she once nurtured. "You're not done, Robert. You still have so much to give." Another miracle was Susan Levin, a sharp-minded film producer he met while working on Gothica in 2003. She didn't just fall in love with the actor she saw, the man beneath the chaos. When Robert pursued her, she laid down one condition: if we're going to be together, you have to turn your life around. It was the ultimatum he needed. For perhaps the first time, Robert faced the truth: he could either continue down the road of self-destruction or fight for love, for family, for life itself. He chose the fight. Rehab, therapy, meditation, even martial arts became part of his healing. Slowly, painfully, he began piecing himself back together, one day at a time. Still, Hollywood wasn't ready to forgive. Insurance companies refused to back films that wanted him. Studios feared he was a liability, but destiny knocked on his door in unexpected ways. Directors like Shane Black and Mel Gibson vouched for him, pushing to give Robert another chance. In 2005, he starred in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, The performance was electric funny, sharp, alive. Critics saw glimpses of the old brilliance, but now mixed with maturity. It was a warning shot to the industry. Robert Downey Jr. was not gone. He was rebuilding. Then came the love story. Robert and Susan married in 2005 for the first time. He had stability, a partner who kept him grounded, someone who reminded him of his worth beyond Hollywood. His demons didn't vanish overnight, but with love and discipline, he found control, and more importantly, purpose. Robert was no longer just fighting for a career. He was fighting for his life. And in that struggle, the stage was being set for the greatest comeback Hollywood would ever witness. The Man in the Iron Suit. 2008, the year Hollywood gambled on a man everyone else had written off. Marvel Studios was preparing to launch a new cinematic universe, but they didn't have Spider-Man. They didn't have the X-Men. All they had was Iron Man, a character most of the world barely knew. And when it came time to cast Tony Stark, the studio faced resistance. Insurance companies didn't trust Robert Downey Jr. Directors hesitated. Executives whispered, "He's too risky." But one man believed, Jon Favreau, the director. He fought for Robert, insisting, "This is Tony Stark. He's lived this story. No one else can play him." And when Robert walked into that audition, something magical happened. He didn't just act, he was Tony Stark. The arrogance, the wit, the broken genius hiding behind charm, it wasn't a performance. It was his truth. When Iron Man hit theaters, the world witnessed not just his superhero, but a resurrection. Audiences roared, critics praised, and suddenly, Robert Downey Jr. wasn't the cautionary tale anymore, he was the miracle. Overnight, he went from being uninsurable to becoming the cornerstone of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Tony Stark's journey mirrored Robert's own, a flawed man, imprisoned by his demons, building himself back up with grit, brilliance, and heart. Success didn't come lightly. Robert poured himself into the role, using every scar, every fall, every lesson from his past to make Tony Stark real. People didn't just see Iron Man, they saw redemption. They saw proof that a man could rise from rock bottom to change the world. The years that followed were electric. Film after film, Iron Man 2, The Avengers, Civil War. Robert wasn't just acting anymore. He was leading a cultural revolution. Marvel's universe became the biggest franchise in cinematic history, and at its center was the Man in the Iron Suit. From press tours to red carpets, fans adored him, kids idolized him, and studios finally understood they hadn't just hired an actor, they had discovered a living legend. But Robert never forgot the journey. Behind the billion-dollar movies, he practiced gratitude. He credited Susan for keeping him grounded, his children for giving him purpose, and his painful past for shaping the man he became. Robert Downey Jr. had done the impossible. He turned his greatest failure into his greatest triumph. And as he suited up on screen, he was really showing the world what was possible when a broken man refuses to stay broken. The hero who changed the game. As the years rolled on, Robert Downey Jr. wasn't just playing Tony Stark, he was Tony Stark. The witty billionaire, the genius with a broken core, the man who stumbled but kept rising. Fans across the globe connected with him because they knew his story wasn't fiction. When Robert said on screen, "I am Iron Man," it wasn't just a line, it was a declaration of survival, a triumph over his demons. The Marvel Cinematic Universe exploded into a cultural phenomenon. With the Avengers in 2012, life, Robert stood at the center of a dream no one thought possible, heroes from different films uniting in one universe. And who anchored it all? Robert's Tony Stark, the flawed hero with heart. Kids wore his mask, adults quoted his lines, and Hollywood finally bowed to the man it once abandoned. Behind the cameras, Robert embraced this second chance with humility and joy. He became one of the highest paid actors in the world. Yet money wasn't his only reward. It was respect. The respect of an industry that had doubted him, of fans who now saw him as a role model, of peers who called him a leader. Castmates often said Robert was the glue of Marvel, the big brother who brought humor, wisdom, and unity to the set. Then came Avengers Endgame in 2019, a cinematic event unlike anything before. Audiences around the world waited to see how the story of these heroes would end. And in its most emotional moment, it was Robert, after 11 years, after countless battles, who delivered the line that brought theaters to tears. "I am Iron Man." With a snap, his character sacrificed everything to save the universe. As the screen faded, so did an era. Fans cried not just for Tony Stark, but for Robert himself, for the journey of a man who had given them hope, laughter, and courage. The boy once lost in addiction had become the world's greatest hero, immortalized not just in film, but in the hearts of millions. On premiere night, as the cast celebrated, Robert stood quietly for a moment, soaking in the love. The world no longer saw him as a broken star. They saw him as the proof that comebacks are real, that redemption is possible, and that sometimes the greatest superheroes aren't born in comic books, they rise from real life beyond the armor. When the dust of Endgame settled, the world wondered what happens to Robert Downey Jr. without Iron Man. Could he step away from the character that defined an entire era? For Robert, it wasn't about leaving Tony Stark behind. It was about proving, once again, that he was more than the sum of his roles, more than the billions Marvel had earned. He was still an artist, still a dreamer, still Robert. In interviews after Endgame, Robert often smiled, his eyes carrying both pride and peace. He knew what that final snap meant to fans, but for him, it was a chapter closing. Playing Tony was the ride of my life, he admitted. But I don't want to be trapped by it. I want to explore, to keep growing. He dove into new ventures, producing films and series, working on passion projects, and even exploring environmental initiatives. With his wife Susan, he launched Team Downey, their production company, telling stories that mattered to them, not just blockbusters. And beyond the screen, Robert dedicated himself to causes close to his heart. He became an advocate for clean energy, launching the Footprint Coalition in 2019, blending technology with a mission to heal the planet. It was Tony Stark's vision, but in real life. Yet what truly grounded him wasn't Hollywood or philanthropy, it was family. Robert often said Susan was the reason he was still alive, still thriving. Together, they raised their children with love and balance, far from the chaos that once consumed his own childhood. With his kids, he wasn't the movie star. He was just dad, cooking meals, making jokes, living quietly when the cameras weren't around. Of course, Hollywood still called. From the dramatic Dolittle to his award-winning performance in Oppenheimer, Robert proved his range hadn't disappeared. He wasn't chasing fame anymore. He was choosing roles that challenged him, that spoke to him as a man who had walked through fire and come out stronger. And the fans, friends. They never left. To them, Robert wasn't just Iron Man, he was a symbol of resilience. The man who showed that you can fall 1,000 times and still rise higher than before. Beyond the armor, beyond the fame, beyond the headlines, Robert Downey Jr. stood as a reminder. Redemption is not just possible, it can be the most powerful story of all. The wisdom of a survivor. By the time Robert Downey Jr. reached his late 50s, his story had become more than just Hollywood gossip. It had become a parable. People no longer asked, "Is he still in trouble?" They asked, "How did he survive?" Because survival, for Robert, wasn't just about staying alive. It was about reclaiming dignity, purpose, and joy after losing it all. When he speaks today, his words carry weight, carved out of pain and redemption. He tells audiences with quiet honesty, remember that just because you hit rock bottom, it doesn't mean you have to stay there. He often reflects on how addiction tried to break him, how prison could have defined him, but how the choice to fight back reshaped everything. One of his greatest lessons is humility. Despite becoming one of the most successful actors in history, Robert admits that without Susan, without family, without mentors who refused to give up on him, he wouldn't be here. You can't do it alone, he often says. Pride isolates you. Love saves you. Another lesson is perseverance. Hollywood shut its doors on him more times than he could count. He faced humiliation, rejection, endless doubt. Yet he never stopped trying. Even when the world said no, Robert believed there was still a yes somewhere ahead. That relentless spirit scraping forward through failure after failure became his greatest weapon. And then there's gratitude. The Robert Downey Jr. of today isn't chasing the spotlight. He takes time to acknowledge every second chance he received, every hand that pulled him out of darkness. He jokes about his past with humor, but behind the laughter is wisdom. It's never too late to turn things around. The best you can do is make the next right choice. For fans, his life isn't just entertainment, it's motivation. He reminds us that genius can be messy, that talent alone isn't enough, that every person must face their own demons. But most importantly, he proves that no fall is final if you have the courage to rise. Robert's journey from a troubled child to a fallen star to a world icon is proof that life isn't about how hard you fall. It's about how powerfully you rise. And in his rise, millions have found hope for their own battles. The legend of the Phoenix. If Robert Downey Jr.'s life were a movie, it would be the kind of story that leaves audiences breathless, heart in their throats, tears on their cheeks, and hope blooming in their hearts. From the restless boy wandering film sets in New York to the young actor fighting for every role, from the dazzling brilliance of Chaplin to the darkness of addiction and prison. His journey is proof that the human spirit can endure the impossible. Today, Robert stands not just as an actor, but as a living symbol of resilience. He has soared higher than anyone could have imagined, yet never forgotten the depth of the valleys he crossed. He shows that fame isn't the measure of a person's worth, but courage, humility, and the ability to rise after destruction are. The man who once read headlines calling him a has-been now inspires millions with every word, every interview, every act of kindness. He has learned that life is fragile, brilliance is fleeting, and second chances are priceless. With his family by his side, his creativity flowing, and his purpose renewed, Robert Downey Jr. embodies what it means to transform pain into power. He often reflects on the lessons of his life, that failure is not the end, That love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that redemption is earned not overnight, but day by day, choice by choice. Fans around the world see Tony Stark on screen, but the true story is far richer. It is the story of a man who fell from grace, faced the darkness of his own making, and emerged not just victorious, but wiser, kinder, and more human than ever before. His legacy is not just the films he left behind, but the lives he touches with his honesty, his humor, and his unwavering courage. So when you think of Robert Downey Jr., don't remember the headlines, the arrests, the chaos. Remember the phoenix that rose from ashes, stronger, brighter, and unstoppable. His life whispers to every dreamer who has stumbled, every person who has fallen, and every soul who fears the night. No matter how far you fall, you can rise. You can reclaim your life. You can shine again. And in that rise, in that relentless pursuit of hope and greatness, Robert Downey Jr. teaches the most timeless lesson of all: your story is never over, and your second act can be legendary.